So global food costs are poised to climb even further on soaring wheat prices after India curbed exports. Droughts, floods, and heat waves are threatening production worldwide, just as Russia's war in Ukraine throttled supply from one of the largest growers. Now, with lower income countries being hit the hardest, Bank of America sees the impact reflected on emerging market sovereign spreads and inflation. Well, we're now joined by Kay Hope, credit research analyst at Bank of America. Kay, thank you so much for joining us. It does seem, when you look at wheat futures, now dropping actually by as much as 3.8% Chicago, it's probably an effect of just why they've been rising up so much. Like, where do we end up? How much of, are we looking at famine? Like, how much higher can these wheat prices go?
Wheat prices can go higher, and that's the expectation. It does take time for some of these moves to be reflected in actual markets. But the concern is that when you have 26 countries around the world who get more than 50% each of their wheat supplies from Russia and Ukraine, those countries are going to have to go somewhere else to meet that need, and that can continue to push things up.
So what does that mean in terms of, I mean, can we talk about supply chains, even if it comes to like food and agriculture? Are we going to be planting more of these crops, or how will it change the way we buy things?
There are some changes in what's being planted, and we are seeing some substitution already in grocery stores. Certain types of vegetable oil are being substituted for others, and that's something that we can continue to see. Ukrainian farmers are starting to report what they're planting this year, and some of them are planting more oils, seeing that need coming through. But what we're hearing from the Ukrainians is that they're planting about, at this point, they've planted about 80% of what they had planted last year. The sowing campaign is ongoing, and so at this point, they're only at 50% of the total that was planted last year. So that is ongoing, but Ukrainian farmers do face issues like fuel, equipment, and personnel to take them through the summer.
And transport, right, in and out of the country.
The transport links are major. So most agricultural products are transported through the ports that are now closed. Ukrainian officials are asking the EU and other countries to please make it easier for trucks to pass, for lorries to get through, and to look at rail. But these are all things that take a little bit of time.
Okay, talk to me, I mean, in your notes, and this is incredible, it is hard to believe that over 2 billion people face regular food security issues when we talk about driverless cars. And that really hit it home. When you write that and you hear that, is there anything that governments can do to try and alleviate some of this?
There are a lot of things that governments are working on, and the UN has a food and agriculture report they write every year that has some terrific recommendations in it. What's interesting to me is that a third of the food produced globally every year is wasted. And so one thing governments are working on doing is reducing that food waste. And in developing markets in particular, that waste happens at the start of the chain. So it happens at the point of production and moving that food to market. Where in developed markets like the UK, a lot of that waste occurs at the household level.
That's really interesting. So does that mean that there's something that big agricultural businesses can do to actually try and reduce that waste?
At the beginning of the chain, there are things that big agricultural companies can do simply by getting involved. Given that most global agriculture is small farms, that's a little bit more difficult than it might sound at the outset. But what we can do at the end of the chain in places like the UK in reducing waste at the consumer level, a lot of people are already talking about, using everything that you buy. Grocery stores that are now selling imperfect foods, things that are a little less than perfect. They're talking with the government about making that sort of a program a little bit broader, reducing some of those regulations that mean you can sell an apple that's a little too big or a carrot that's a little bit bent over.
So, Kate, talk to me about what this means actually for your space, which is the credit space. So does it change, the viability of credit space, for example, for big companies or also countries?
It's both. And we're seeing some of the food issues coming through in the emerging market spreads that you already mentioned. At the corporate credit level, we're already talking to, our credit analysts are talking to their companies about who relies on food inputs for their products. Beer companies who use barley and hops, grocery stores, retail who are just starting to recover from the COVID pandemic. What's going to happen to those as people have to shift their spending patterns? Where will people look to spend or not spend? And what happens to margins as we go forward?
Is there any country also that, when it comes to sovereign credit, I mean, I'm thinking of Egypt, just because so much of the consumption there, for example, for some of the, the bread that's made is in some of those countries. So does it have an immediate effect actually on sovereign credit
Egypt
rating?
and Tunisia are two of the big ones, absolutely. I believe there were headlines yesterday that Egypt has already concluded an agreement with India to try to find an exemption to some of the rules that India put in place earlier this week. And so I do expect us to see, we talk about COP26 and upcoming COP27, environmental issues meeting social issues. That's part of what this has to be.
Okay, this is a dumb question maybe, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Can you switch from like wheat flour to rice flour, or is that something that takes time because of tastes and also the supply chain?
For that particular example, I'm probably not your best expert, but there are examples of where things can be done. Corn flour, switching certain biofuels, going from biofuels to using that corn again to produce food. I think something like 40% of the corn produced in the U.S. is used for biofuels.
That's incredible, isn't it?
There are ways to find the food that's needed and get that to populations.